Mr. President, on December 8th, Donald Trump nominated Andew to serve as Secretary of Labor. He was scheduled to come before the Help Committee tomorrow for his confirmation hearing. There is some reporting suggesting that he is having some second thoughts, and I sincerely hope that that is true. The reasons Mr. Puzder is a terrible choice for this job are literally too numerous for me to cover fully, but I'm at least going to give it a start here. If you work for a living, the labor secretary is very important to you. This person is responsible for protecting the interests of 150 million American workers. He will be the person responsible for enforcing the laws that ensure that employers actually pay workers for every hour they work and setting the standards to prevent workplace injuries and even death. Unfortunately, Mr. Puzder is not the kind of person the American people can trust to stand up for workers. Since 2000, Mr. Puzder has served as the CEO of the billion-dollar company CKE Restaurant Holdings. Now, you may know it better as the parent company of Carl's Jr. and Hardee's. These two fast food chains are known for paying very low wages to workers. Mr. Puzder has a long record of cheating workers out of overtime. He's paid out millions of dollars to settle claims when he was caught cheating. We're not talking about isolated incidents. They reflect the kind of business that Mr. Puzder built. Mr. Puzder is a frequent political pundit and commentator who has vocally opposed higher minimum wages. He has also strongly opposed new overtime protections that would give 4 million workers an estimated $1.5 billion raise in a single year. Mr. Puzder also delights in personal disdain for his workers. He bragged in his very first memo as CEO. He wrote that he wanted, quote, no more people behind the counter unless they have their teeth. Ha ha. He said he would like to replace his workers with robots because, quote, they are always polite, they always upsell, they never take a vacation, and there's never a slip and fall or an age, sex, or discrimination case. The Senate has an obligation to hear from those who are best qualified to tell America about Mr. Puzder's suitability to be labor secretary and to stand up for American workers, his own workers. And that's why many of us asked the chairman of the Help Committee to include Mr. Puzder's workers in his confirmation hearing. And when the chairman refused to do so, we just went ahead and convened our own forum to allow those workers a chance to speak. 17 senators attended. Those 17 senators heard from Laura McDonald, who worked as a general manager at Carl's Jr. in Tucson, Arizona for 20 years. For years, she was forced to work extra hours without pay. Employees like Laura are the subject of a major lawsuit against Mr. Puzder's company, CKE, regarding unpaid overtime. Those 17 senators heard from Lupe Guzman, who is a single mother who has devoted the last 7 years of her life to Carl's Jr. in Las Vegas, Nevada. She's worked the graveyard shift for rock-bottom wages. 7 years of loyalty. And Lupe is still paid so little that she's on food stamps to feed her kids. Lupe sat in front of the United States Senate and wept openly about her terrible treatment at the hands of Mr. Puzder's company. The senators also heard from Roberto Ramirez, who has worked in the fast food industry for over 20 years, mostly at Carl's Jr. in Los Angeles, California. He worked regularly off the clock at Carl's Jr., meaning they didn't pay him. Roberto even had a full paycheck stolen by his manager. You know, for every Laura, Lupe, and Roberto, we found dozens of workers who are afraid to speak out about the terrible conditions at CKE. We compiled some of the stories from folks brave enough to speak up into a 20-page report detailing firsthand accounts of the men and women who work for Mr. Puzder. Those stories are horrifying, and I will read some of them later this hour. Mr. Puzder's company has a truly atrocious record of treating his own workers terribly. Indeed, he has dripping disdain for people who work for a living. This alone disqualifies him to be Secretary of Labor. But there's more. In recent weeks, it has come out that Mr. Puzder employed an undocumented immigrant in his household for years, and he didn't pay taxes on that employment. Yep, you heard that correctly. The Trump administration, which bellows about building a wall and pounds its chest about ripping millions of families apart with a deportation force, threatens to send millions of DREAM Act kids with deportation, has no problem putting a guy in charge of the Labor Department who cheats on his taxes and employs undocumented workers. The hypocrisy of that is pretty stunning, even for the Trump administration. And then there's the controversy over alleged spousal abuse. Over 25 years ago, Mr. Puzder's first wife appeared on an episode of Oprah Winfrey in a show about spousal abuse. I have watched the episode in which she appeared, as I believe every senator should. I found it extraordinarily troubling. Alongside his company's poor record of treatment of female employees, his highly explicit and sexualized ads, and his snide comments about sex discrimination, there is ample evidence that Mr. Puzder is a terrible choice to head the agency charged that women and men are treated fairly in the workplace. And I understand that no matter who President Trump picks to run the Labor Department, I'm probably going to have a lot of issues with that person. But this is different. Andrew Puzder should not be the Labor Secretary. And if you ask the senators in this body, Republicans and Democrats, if you ask them behind closed doors with the cameras turned off, you will have a hard time finding people who think this divisive nomination is good for the country. It's been suggested that Mr. Puzder is, quote, tired of the abuse, close quote, that he's received during this confirmation process. Well, I think the workers at his companies are pretty tired of the abuse they've received while being at the mercy of an employer that doesn't care about them at all and who goes out of his way to squeeze them out of every last dime. That is literally the opposite of what we need in a labor secretary. I was prepared to question him on these issues tomorrow, but I hope it is true that he will withdraw his nomination before then.